Hello viewers, thank you for joining me. It's kind of funny to me that this is the anime I ended up reviewing right after I went off on a short shipping rant in my last one, something I do usually try to avoid, but it is purely coincidental. This was yet another show that I took note of early on and planned to get to eventually, and honestly the main reason it got pushed so high up on my to-watch list is because my best friend has been recommending it pretty much since it first came out. But before we jump in, please note that this is a reverse harem anime, and because the characters are my favorite aspect of any story, this will be another review with spoilers. Kiss Him Not Me is the story of Kai Serinuma, a high school girl who's very out and proud about being not only an otaku, but a fujoshi as well, and if you're not familiar with the latter term, well, I'm tempted to say that if you were an anime fan in junior high, you probably knew at least one, but it's possible that my own experience was skewed by Ouran High School Host Club coming out when I was in middle school. So a fujoshi is basically a girl who obsessively ships attractive guys together, both real and fictional. And while this one part of her made Kai a very fun character, I noticed right away that this aspect of her character wasn't all there was to her. She's obsessive, but not in the shut-in recluse way that otaku are typically characterized as. She's kind and cheerful, not even that socially awkward until boys start becoming interested in her. She has friends and a family who accept and understand her, and she's involved in non-anime related clubs. There was a lot to like about Kai from the get-go. She felt like a real person. The quirk that drew in viewers was a big part of her character, but not all there was to her, and I liked that. Alright, so I'm about to sound like a hypocrite on some of those points, but it'll be brief, I promise. The story really kicks off when one of Kai's favorite characters dies and she shuts herself in her room for a week. When she finally re-emerges, she's lost so much weight that she doesn't even recognize herself. She returns to school and a bunch of the boys who wouldn't have given her a second look before are suddenly tripping over each other to ask her out. So much of this story is getting to know each of the characters better over time, so we will be coming back to everyone again, but to give you a quick rundown. First is Nanashima, the sporty one with the temper, who just happens to look like her favorite character. Igarashi is his more level-headed friend. Igarashi is kind of hard for me to explain because I don't have a lot of concrete evidence for my opinions, just feelings I got from him. Like, I do believe he's a genuinely nice person. He does stand up for her when Nana was rude before they were attracted to her. But you can also tell there's something a little darker and manipulative underneath that. I got a bit of a player vibe from him. From the beginning, he's the most aggressive about the whole "I'm here because I want to be your boyfriend, not just another friend" stance that they all take at one point or another. But early on, he doesn't seem all that interested in Kai as a person either. Like I said, we'll come back to everyone, and hopefully you'll see what I mean later on. Next there's Shinomiya, who's a year younger and very small and cute on top of that, which he's very insecure about, so he covers it up with an aggressive, kind of know-it-all attitude. He particularly clashes with Nanashima, who doesn't exactly excel at the academic side of things. And the last boy is a little different. Mutsumi is the only one she was friends with beforehand. They're both in the history club, which he's president of, and he's just a very laid-back, positive guy. He's happy as long as everyone around him is happy, and he's more than a little oblivious. At the end of her first day back, all four corner her. The first three with the intention of asking her out, and Mutsumi kind of just jumps on board afterwards. Kai has no idea how to handle a situation like this and awkwardly agrees to go to the movies with all of them. And so that's what they do, kicking off this new routine of them all hanging out together as a group. And the end of this first date brings up another aspect of this story that I really liked. At no point do they shy away from Kai's otaku and fujoshi nature. She doesn't try to change who she is just because people see her differently now. She tries to hide it at first, but it's really short-lived, because across from the movie theater is a store selling limited edition merchandise from her favorite show, and there's only so much you can say when you run away from your dates and come back with a body pillow of a fictional boy. So she formally tells them she's an otaku, prepared for rejection, and they're all a little taken aback, except for Mutsumi, who's just happy to see her passionate about something. But to their credit, no one immediately changes their mind about her. And I have to say, I can't remember the last time a show had me laughing so hard from start to finish, practically every episode. But this scene, where the boys are all trying to convince her, "Oh yeah, I've seen anime," is still one of my favorites in the whole show. But I will say, as much as I loved it, this isn't a show I would recommend to new anime fans. So much of the humor relies on understanding the references and aspects of otaku culture when the boys don't. Because they all decide to stick around, and now that this wall has been broken down, Kai starts to share more and more of herself, and a study session at her house reveals her as a Fujoshi as well. Honestly, at this point, they don't even seem fazed by her posters or her doujinshi collection or her literal shrine to that dead anime character. And I know most of this is for comedy's sake, but Kiss Him Not Me sends a great real-life message too, rewarding Kai for being true to herself and never backing down from defending her passions, and the more time the boys spend with her, the less put off they are by these things, starting to appreciate her for who she really is. Eventually, this leads them to a doujinshi convention, where she meets a girl named Shima, who saves her from this creepy photographer. Shima shares a lot of the same interests with Kai, is actually the author of her favorite doujinshi series, and is also a student at their school, and it takes the boys about 3 seconds to realize they're out of their league when Shima cements in her place as the final love interest. And yet another thing I felt this series did really well was to give Shima some backstory early on, because she does seem a little too perfect right off the bat. Her new rivals are convinced that she must be fake, that it's just a matter of time until she slips up. Honestly, that's what I thought at first too, but I really liked what they actually did with her character. Shima grew up in a very wealthy family, which made it really difficult to connect with her peers as a child. Basically, whenever she did well in anything, everyone around her would assume that she didn't have to work for it like they did, that she won awards because of her parents' money and influence. So it motivated her to stand on her own and work really hard to be good at everything she does. I just thought it was a nice touch. But I'm pretty sure the character development moment everyone remembers most is episode 5, when the question of liking Kai only for her looks is first addressed. There's a Valentine's contest being hosted by the creators of her favorite anime, asking fans to send in personalized chocolates of the characters. Kai ends up eating all of her rejected designs and gains back all the weight she lost, and this ends up testing the boys more than her anime obsession. Shima and Mutsumi are unaffected, of course. They both liked her before she started getting everyone's attention. Shino and Nana have the biggest problem with it, leading the charge to help her exercise and get back into shape. And I don't really mean to skip over them. Their attitudes are disappointing, but I've always felt this episode was more about Igarashi than anyone else. I mentioned before that it felt like there was something a little superficial about him. He seems surprised himself to realize that the way she looks now changes nothing about the way he feels about her. You know, the way it should be. Ultimately, Kai is motivated to lose the weight again. It's just easier for her to go out and live her life to the fullest when she's healthy, but this definitely felt like Igarashi's episode to me, and there was a huge jump in my opinion of him after this. I said at the beginning that there would be spoilers, and it's because of this. The whole story is about fleshing out these characters as Kai spends more time with each of them. At this point, even if I wasn't as fond of some of the characters, I wanted to be. There are 3 more characters to expand on. Shima and Igarashi stay pretty constant from this point on. Shinomiya, unfortunately, feels a little like he was pushed to the side. He does get his focus episode, but it just didn't feel as impactful to me as the others, kind of just expanding on what we already knew about him, that he's younger and smaller and the butt of just about every joke, the one that no one takes seriously. And I mean, his episode is the one where they go to the beach, where his insecurities can be front and center. He has a few lines that made me suspect that maybe he's used to being belittled, and that's why he shields himself by being everyone else's strongest critic. But they don't really go into that. His episode kind of just ends on the note that he's growing with every experience, but I mean, so is everyone else. The last two bring this story to a more serious, deeper note. Nanashima's episode starts out really lighthearted. We finally get to see his softer side, that he's really caring with his little sister, and then he and Kai get hired to work this stage show at an amusement park, which he of course sees as his big chance to finally get close to her. But things quickly go downhill when he overworks himself and gets sick, passing out during rehearsal. Kai takes him home, planning to take care of him for the day, but in this fevered haze he grabs her, pins her to the bed, and luckily Igarashi shows up to check in on them before he could get any further than kissing her. But I have to give huge props to this show for how it handles this storyline, because no one tries to just brush it off, even if he wasn't totally in control of his actions. Kai goes home and actually goes back to read manga with similar plot lines that she used to really like, trying to understand how she could have ever thought it was okay before, because it's so awful when it happens in real life. And I have to say, the voice acting was really good in general throughout, but hearing Kai screaming at him to stop and knowing that she's not able to overpower him if he doesn't was really chilling. The scene was done really well, as awful as it is. But equally important was that when Nana finally comes back to his senses and is told what he's done, he realizes the gravity of the situation right away. And not only does he understand that Kai might not be able to forgive him, but also that she might need some space while she sorts out her own feelings on the situation. There's just this complete acknowledgement that though the fever may have been why he forced himself on her, and that it's not something he ever would have done if he'd been aware of his actions, that it doesn't automatically make it okay. No different from if he'd been drunk or high or sleep deprived. It doesn't necessarily make him a bad person, but it doesn't immediately excuse his actions either. Ultimately, Kai does forgive him and agrees to move on and patch up their friendship, ending with a speech about how every situation is different and you have to do what feels right for you. And maybe some people felt this episode was a little too preachy. It is basically just a straight-up public service announcement on sexual assault, but I really liked it. I feel like this is a topic that's brought up a lot these days, but rarely this well. Which leaves us with Mutsumi, whose personal story was really kind of fascinating to me, maybe because it was a little more vague. Mutsumi's character has been left pretty much alone since episode 1. It's clear that he really likes being part of this group of friends and going on all these little adventures, but it's not until episode 10 that it's brought up that he's a little odd, and that they're not sure they really understand him. And most importantly, Shima expresses her doubts that he's interested in Kai romantically at all, and he does seem surprised to hear that that's what actually brought this group together. And don't get me wrong, I love Mutsumi's character. His oblivious, positive attitude is a lot of fun, but this revelation wasn't actually the important part of the episode. As you could probably guess, this prompts him to finally analyze his feelings and realize he does like Kai in that way. But I figured that was kind of a given, something that was just bound to happen eventually. The real draw of Mutsumi's storyline was a little darker. He found an old treasure map hidden in the club room and leads them all on a treasure hunt through a cave, but they get separated during this journey, losing most of their flashlights in the process. And when Kai finally finds Mutsumi, he's just frozen to the spot, unable to move a muscle. He tells her that as a kid, his older brother used to play a lot of pranks on him. One night he was locked in a storage room and forgotten there, leaving him with this paralyzing fear of the dark. And I felt like the way he revealed this story was really telling, because he doesn't get super emotional or anything while he's recounting it for her. But in my experience at least, when a person is asked to talk about something really bad that happened to them in the past, it's almost second nature to try to laugh it off or brush over it like it wasn't a big deal. And I'll come back to this in a minute, but the scary thing is that sometimes people don't see through you, and I didn't feel like Kai did. Like, she agrees that it was an awful thing, but doesn't really seem to understand how much it's affected him, even when the results are right in front of her. But she's given another chance about a week later, when none other than Mutsumi's brother Kazuma becomes their new student teacher, and I don't think it's possible for Kazuma to be less like Mutsumi. Mutsumi may be almost unbearably positive, but everything he does and says is genuine. Kazuma struck me as the type of guy who has a different face for everyone he interacts with. It takes Kazuma no time at all to win over all of his brother's classmates, and then he starts to move in on Mutsumi's friends. He quickly picks out Kai as the way to really get under his skin, so he briefly joins her list of suitors. And you know what? I'm not even gonna linger on that. The other kids confront him themselves that it's rather inappropriate given his position. But where Kazuma is concerned, it's not really about what he does, but why he does those things. I don't mind spoilers, personally, but the friend who was recommending this show so enthusiastically to me only really went into detail on a few points, and this was one of them. He was really moved by the show's portrayal of sibling abuse, and it might be precisely because it was built up so much for me that I have to critique it a little bit. Like, it's definitely there, and a lot of the most striking aspects of it are the most subtle. Literally everything Kazuma says to or about Mutsumi is just ever so casually dismissive, silently pressuring Mutsumi's friends and classmates to look down on him. And that is really damaging, especially because it's so constant, arguably more damaging than the rarer, more extreme acts of aggression. Everything about Kazuma is so psychological. Like, the first time Mutsumi tries to confront him, he locks him in a locker, knowing full well that he has this phobia from a past confrontation. There are just so many levels to why Kazuma's actions are abusive, and it disappointed me a little for the show not to call him out on that for what it was, in part because it was so on the nose about some of the other serious topics it addresses. But I will say that I think the subtlety allowed me to look at this issue from a few different angles. I think Mutsumi's relationship with his brother, or lack thereof, brings up a few different issues, and I feel like there are two really big driving forces to why they grew up the way they did and how things got to this point. One is just the way we're raised to view our siblings in general. There may be some cultural differences I'm overlooking, but I definitely grew up surrounded by the expectation that all siblings would have a love-hate relationship. Not just like an acceptance that of course you're going to argue sometimes. The stance I'm most familiar with is more along the lines of, because you're so close to your siblings, it's also inevitable that when you do fight, it'll be worse than with anyone else. Even as I'm trying to break this down, it sounds almost like one of those things that's so obvious and accepted that it doesn't need to be said, but watching Kazuma and Mutsumi interact made me really think about that. I feel like more often than not, this sentiment is interpreted as, oh, I can treat my siblings as badly as I want because they have to love me anyway. And I mean, first of all, that's not true, and it shouldn't be. But honestly, what I really wanted to see was the boys' relationship with their parents. For me, the big question was, is Kazuma such an awful person just because he was never taught to respect his brother? Did their parents see their older son tormenting their younger one and just excuse it as typical behavior between siblings, assuming it would work itself out as they got older? Because maybe that is the case most of the time, but it did not happen here, and I can't help feeling like it could have been prevented if there wasn't this general acceptance that siblings are just going to be awful to each other. The other issue I saw represented in their relationship had less to do with them being brothers, and more with just people in general. For a little backstory, it is Mutsumi's kindness itself that Kazuma has a problem with. They got along reasonably well when they were younger, and maybe Mutsumi's constant kindness and self-sacrificing nature made Kazuma see something in himself that he didn't like, because everything Kazuma does to his brother is to try and get Mutsumi to finally show his own dark side and stand up for himself. The scary thing is, I believe Kazuma does have good intentions. It's one of those situations that makes you ask whether the end result justifies the means you took to get there. As far as he's concerned, there's no such thing as going too far, as long as Mutsumi comes out of it tougher than he was before. But through this other way of looking at it, it's as much an issue of communication as respect. Yet another tale of one person forcing their own values and opinions on another instead of trying to understand them. I know I've more than made my point by now. It just disappointed me that there wasn't as much of a definitive lesson to this one, because it did address some serious topics. Honestly, I'm not sure Kai ever really understood just how bad their relationship was, but Mutsumi does come out of it stronger than before, and armed with the knowledge that he's in love with Kai. So to bring us back around for the last episode, Kai has gotten away with her selective amnesia up to this point. She managed to put the fact that they all hang out because the other 5 each have a crush on her out of her mind, but now that Mutsumi understands his feelings, he's ready to take the next step, confessing them to her, which puts the other 4 in a tricky position. Either they all confess to her or risk losing their chance. So that's what they do, and Kai agrees to go on a date with each of them before making a final decision, only for another season to be announced for her favorite anime, leading her to conclude that she wouldn't have time to date anyone. And I know a lot of people were disappointed by the final episode, but it was pretty much what I'd expected. In my experience at least, the anime versions of harems don't usually have a conclusive ending. This one is based on a manga, but they're often based on dating games, where the player gets to decide the ending, so all the anime is really meant to do is pull in a wider audience and introduce the characters, which I think it does accomplish. This show was really fun and funny, and could get serious when it needed to. I think all the characters had their good points, something to make me invested in them and want to see more, so I definitely plan to read the manga too. I will say that this is a series that I doubt could branch out much from its intended audience. Not everyone is going to find the otaku fujoshi aspect of the story as much fun as I did, and past that it's a pretty typical reverse harem. I do think each suitor breaks out of their represented trope a little, like Nanashima being the aggressive jock, but also being really sweet and responsible with his little sister. But that does feel like a much less substantial part of the story, and is something I hope the manga expands on. So if it sounds like something you'd enjoy, I think you'll have a lot of fun with this anime. But the flip side is that if it doesn't sound like something that will impress you or draw you in, it probably won't. Thank you for watching.